Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon. It is just afternoon now. Thank you all for coming. I'm Paul Owens, the Orlando Sentinel's opinions editor. Welcome to another in our Florida Forward series of. Today's forum is on the future of Puerto Rico and the impact on the island and here in Central Florida. It's another joint production of the Sentinel and our Spanish language partner, El Sentinel. And once again, I have the honor and pleasure of moderating a forum with the editor of El Sentinel, Rafael Palacio. This is the third forum where we've teamed up, following ones on immigration policy and the change in U.S.-Cuban relations. And Rafael will be following me at the podium momentarily with some words. Meanwhile, as Rafael said, please feel free to tweet from this event using the hashtag #OSPuerto but if you would otherwise silence your cell phones, we'd appreciate it. This is also the second Florida Forward Forum where we have partnered with Valencia College. We held a presidential debate watching party last September on West Campus, and we were so pleased with our partnership that we were eager to keep it going. We appreciate Valencia's leadership on public policy questions for our community. For today's forum, we're honored to have Osceola Campus President Kathleen Plinsky with us. Dr. Plinsky, would you like to say a few words?
Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a Valencia College. Mi nombre es Kathleen Plinsky y soy presidente de los recintos de Valencia College in Osceola, Lake Nona, y Point Siena. Welcome to Valencia. We are so happy to host today's special event. Thanks to the Sentinel and El Sentinel for making this event possible. Valencia College serves more than 60,000 students a year, 35% of which are Hispanic. And at this campus, the Osceola campus, we serve 18,000 students a year, the majority of whom are Hispanic. We are proud of the diversity of our students, and we are particularly proud of the success of our students. Yeah. Valencia has been recognized by Excelencia in Education for having the top program in the nation for accelerating Latino student success. We have been named as one of the top 100 colleges in the country for Hispanic students. And we rank number 4 in the country for the number of degrees that we award. Estamos muy orgullosos. We also recognize that there is much work to do in our community. There are communities within our service district that do. Very grateful for the leadership of Congressman Soto during his time in the Florida legislature to help secure funding for a brand new Valencia campus in Point Siena that will open. My pleasure to invite Mr. Jay Galbraith, our Vice President for Public Affairs, to the podium for a special presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Plinsky, and Paul, thank you for allowing us a moment to do this. We didn't really have a chance the last 6 months because now Congressman Soto has been so busy serving our community, and in fact, he just got back from the Mideast as a member of Congress, and so we appreciate what he's doing for us. We are blessed in Valencia to have elected officials that reach across the aisle, that are nonpartisan, to serve our communities. And Congressman Soto is one of those. I've had the privilege to know the Congressman for a number of years. And as a member of the Florida Senate and the Florida House, time and time again, he reached across the aisle to serve all of our students. And in the coming months, we will open a campus in Point Siena. And decades from now, people will drive by that college and know that Congressman Soto stood strong for our community to ensure that a key area in our community was served by higher education. Congressman, this presentation. Normally we don't talk about the award, but this we do. President Sugar, Congressman, asked us to make our awards mean something more than just a plaque. And what you have before you are two pieces within this shadow box. The silver plate was made by our students in our CNC lab at our advanced manufacturing facility. And it's a way to train them on advanced machinery in the future. And then also the state of Florida is manufactured at our 3D lab by our students. Congressman, thank you for your service.
Just briefly so we could get started, the origin of this was pretty simple. More than 20% less kids from South Osceola County were attending college than from North Osceola. And we know that education is the foundation of the American dream. And so when we heard of a plan for Valencia to invest in South Osceola, in the Point Siena area, I did my very best over the years to make sure they got the funding they needed, so that so many of our students, many of them Hispanic from Point Siena. Ground, and I know Dr. Plinsky, you're going to do a great job of helping lead there. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Plinsky, Vice President Galbraith, and congratulations, Congressman Soto. I would like to. There are a lot of folks who have been involved in planning, organizing, and supporting today's event. I'd like to say a special thank you to Telemundo Orlando for their support for today's event. And finally, before we dive into today's topic, I'd like to acknowledge the publisher and editor-in-chief of the Sentinel, Alvaro Cahaifa, who is with us. Alvaro oversees every element of the Orlando Sentinel operation, including our news coverage and community outreach efforts like this. So thank you, Alvaro. Now a few words from our co-moderator, Rafael Palacio.
Thank you, Paul. I'm gonna be very brief because we have only an hour and a half for this amazing. Something that is very, very close to everybody in this room, and is the future of the island of Puerto Rico. So I'm gonna take the opportunity just to say, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We worked very hard to make sure that the room is packed, because that way we can show everybody that the issue of Puerto Rico is very, very important in Central Florida. I'm going to have the task, not an easy task, of taking some of the questions from you guys to ask our panelists. So there's a couple of ways we're going to do it, but the main one is there is a ball in the back of the room where you guys can write your question. There's a lot of questions that I'm going to go right away and start getting them, so we can, when we finish the presentation, we can start with the fun part of the event, which is answering some of your questions. If you guys want to get up and write a question, no problem. Your seat is going to be safe. It's not going to be reassigned, so don't worry about that. Also, I want to say thanks, o mejor dicho, gracias, to all my colleagues and friends from the media, Paula, who's tweeting, and Univision, and Donaldo from Telemundo, and Cecilia from La Prensa, because they are going to make this event even much better. So thank you so much. I know, by the way, after 14 years being the editor of El Sentinel, that Puerto Rico is a very, very interesting topic, and everybody's very passionate about Puerto Rico. So let's try to put everything in writing and questions. Most of you guys have the opportunity of interacting with the panelists, probably, and that's what we're hoping, that after the forum, you guys can even talk to them. And also, it's a good opportunity, by the way, to meet reporters, El Sentinel team. We have a new reporter from Puerto Rico, and her name is Jennifer Marcial Ocasio. Some of you guys already know her. She's in the back. Also a good opportunity to know my boss, Avido. You guys can complain to him. And some of the other reporters of the Orlando Sentinel. So thank you so much, and we're going to start right now.
Okay. Thanks, Rafael. If it's possible to sum up the relationship between the United States mainland and Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory and home to 3.5 million U.S. citizens, I'd suggest the following. It's complicated. Consider the reaction in last week's World Baseball Classic of players on Puerto Rico's team, which advanced to the finals before losing to the U.S. team. Players for Puerto Rico were asked whether they would favor eliminating their team if the island ever becomes the 51st state. Enrique Hernandez, one of the team's players and also a Los Angeles Dodger, didn't mince words. Hell no, he said. We're part of the United States, but we don't necessarily feel like we're Americans. I always tell people I'm only American when I don't need to show a passport at the airport. Of course, I realize Hernandez speaks for some Puerto Ricans, but not for all. I suspect there are a wide range of views just in this room. Puerto Rico has been a U.S. territory since 1898. 100 years ago, President Woodrow Wilson signed legislation making Puerto Ricans U.S. citizens. And the island has held its current status as a U.S. Commonwealth since 1952. It has conducted 4 referenda, or plebiscites, on whether to keep or change the island's status. A 5th one is scheduled for June, when voters will be asked to choose between statehood and independence. But this upcoming vote will take place under uniquely challenging circumstances, a full-blown debt crisis. For the past year and a half, Puerto Rico has been under pressure from Congress and its creditors to restructure more than $70 billion in debt. Government services and benefits have been cut, taxes have been raised, and more service cuts and tax hikes are looming. A financial board created by Congress last year is overseeing the process. The resolution, if any, of the status question this summer and the actions taken to ease the debt crisis clearly will have a huge impact on Puerto Ricans living on the island, but the impact also will be felt on the U.S. mainland, where millions of Puerto Ricans have relocated. As economic problems on the island have deepened over the past decade, the outmigration has accelerated. Florida is now home to more than 1 million residents of Puerto Rican descent, including more than 250,000 here in Central Florida. Metro Orlando, which includes here in Kissimmee, is now home to the 2nd largest Puerto Rican community on the U.S. mainland. Is Puerto Rico better off remaining a Commonwealth or embracing statehood or independence? What is the best path for the island to navigate out of its economic crisis? And what might the consequences be for Florida? We'll be exploring these issues and a lot of related questions in today's forum. We have 4 knowledgeable panelists with us to respond to our questions and to some from you, which Rafael will be posing. There are strong passions on these issues, so we welcome a robust dialogue here today, but also a respectful one. We're talking to the panelists and to the audience. I'm sure we'll have a good discussion over the next 90 minutes, but we'll continue to cover these issues, of course, in the weeks and months ahead in the Orlando Sentinel and El Sentinel, in print and through our digital platforms for desktop and mobile devices. Now it's time to introduce today's panelists behind me to my left and my right. I'm going to introduce each of them briefly just by name and title. They are an impressive group, and if I took the time to go through each of their full backgrounds and professional achievements, I'm afraid we wouldn't have enough time to get to all of our questions. But I'd encourage you to read more about them on the program for today's event. Our first panelist, who's already been to the podium, is Congressman Darren Soto, who is Florida's first ever U.S. representative of Puerto Rican descent. Our next panelist, next to him, is Daniel Garza, president of the Libre Initiative, a nonprofit organization that advocates limited government and economic freedom to empower the U.S. Hispanic community. Our next panelist at the far end is Jose Davila, vice president for policy and government relations with the Hispanic Federation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting families and strengthening institutions. And our last panelist is Carlos Mercader, Executive Director of the Puerto Rican Federal Affairs Administration, which is the primary liaison between Puerto Rico's officials and the White House, Congress, and federal agencies. I am going to do my best to rotate today's questions among our panel members, but we're counting on other panelists who have thoughts on each question to speak up as well, especially if they have a different perspective. That's why we're here today, to hear multiple views. And as Raphael mentioned, we're going to take breaks periodically for questions from the audience, written questions that Raphael will be screening. So let's get started. We'll begin with the discussion of the status question, which has been debated for Puerto Rico for decades. Puerto Rico is a commonwealth. Do any of our panelists, and this is a general question for any of the panelists who want to jump in, do any of our panelists see any advantages that come from that status? Anyone want to speak up for the Commonwealth status? So, okay, then now we'll go to the other side, the disadvantages. What rights and benefits are denied to Puerto Ricans on the island because of its Commonwealth status?
Yeah, if I may. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rafael, Congressman Soto. I want to also recognize here in the audience the majority leader from the Puerto Rico Senate, Carmelo Rios, who's a good friend, and it's I guess and actually a local from Orlando, but now living in Puerto Rico. So talking about the inequalities that Puerto Rico has in terms of comparison with other states. You talked about our office being the main liaison between the federal government and the state agencies and the state government of Puerto Rico. Right now, we're in a situation in which we are begging, if we may, for Puerto Rico to be included in any reform process of the health system in the United States. Since we are not a state, we were not included in the failed repeal and replace bill that was presented like a month ago, and we are in a situation in which we back when Obamacare, the ACA was enacted, we were not included either. But a last-minute provision gave Puerto Rico a block grant of some billions so that it could be used for our health system throughout a period of years. The amount of money was very small compared to what the states receive in terms of Medicaid. Right now, we're facing a Medicaid cliff. That money, it's running out by the end of the year. And even though when we had Promesa, we had a year-long of discussions of the bill and what it represented for Puerto Rico and the fiscal crisis, and even though that we had, after that, a congressional task force report on the economic development of the island, which highlights this crisis, and it says, and it tells Congress, everyone, you can go and look it up, it came up December 20th of 2016. It basically says that this issue needed to be tackled in the first period of the year. Right now, we are in a process in Congress, they're dealing with the continuing resolution, and we are in that begging process that I mentioned before, just asking for Congress to take a look at the issue, take a look at the urgency of the matter, and just find a way so we can find some monies to basically fund the system for a year, 2 years, whatever. That's the first inequality that we have health, and we're working on it right now. If we were a state, we would have congressmen or congresswomen, and we would have senators, right? And we would have been, there was no question that we would have been included in whatever bill or whatever bill comes forward in terms of in health. But that happens throughout all of the other programs, all of the other legislation that passes in the Hill. We're always the territory. We're always, for some, we're Costa Rica. For some, when you go to Congress, and thankfully, and I gotta say this, we have people that represent us very well, like Congressman Darren Soto. I've been to his office, I've met with him. He's working hard on this issue, and I recognize that, and I'm thankful for that. And as Darren Soto, we have other congressmen. We have Sean Duffy, people that understand the issue and work for us, probably not even having, if you ask why is he working with us, I don't know. He understood that the inequality and he's working for us. Then you have Sean Duffy, you have Curbelo, you have the resident commissioner, who's our main champion in the Hill, Jennifer Gonzalez, and you have some others that understand the situation. But then you have a lot that Democrats and Republicans, this is not a partisan thing. You go to their offices and they send you their foreign affairs person, and you, why? And they, oh yeah, we're gonna send some USAID money. There's a lot of ignorance into what Puerto Rico is, and it happens again on both sides of the aisle. It doesn't happen on one side or the other. So I could go on and on and on, just telling you about how I see it on a daily basis, the inequalities and the deficiencies of the system. And I just want to say something in terms of your initial regards, Paul, and it's that according to Sanchez Valle, which is the Supreme Court case that was heard last year, the Solicitor General, which is the main counsel for the administration at the time, and when she presented the position of the government at the time before the panel of the Supreme Court, they basically said that back in 1950, the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States had never changed. That it was basically the same since 1898 when we became a territory of the United States. What happened in 1952, we were able to choose our own governor. But in terms of the relationship, the legal structure of the relationship, we've always been a territory. And it's even highlighted more when you see the Promesa bill. Because Promesa bill is basically founded on that principle that Puerto Rico is a territory, and as territories, Congress has the last word on what happens in territories.
If I may.
Yeah.
My position has been the same throughout the campaign and before when I was in the state legislature, which is I believe that the decision has to come from the Puerto Ricans living on the island. And it comes from a real historic foundation, which is that colonialism in the federal government has had a controversial and many times negative effect on the island. And so I've always been concerned as someone born in New Jersey, of Puerto Rican descent, living here in Florida, of me telling, as a federal official, what the people on the island need to do. That being said, I am looking forward to there being a plebiscite on June 11th, and will support the outcome of it, and will advocate strenuously for it, whatever the people of Puerto Rico decide. And to help in that, I've made sure to be on all the committees that have jurisdiction over it. I serve on the Indian, Insular, and Alaskan Affairs Subcommittee, which has jurisdiction over status and over the implementation of PROMESA. I also sit on the Oversight Committee under Natural Resources, which also has oversight over PROMESA. And so the key that I've understood from the beginning is that the connection between our regions runs so deep, whether it's from common heritage, like myself, or those who are born directly on the island, whether it be the economic ties, everything from trade directly here in Orlando, to the port relationship between Jacksonville, to the fact that we have a common relocation. There's over 1 million Puerto Ricans here for a reason. We had a huge exodus down from the tri-state area of many folks retiring like my family, and also folks coming up from the island like my family did in '96 when there were changes in the tax codes. So this relationship runs deep, and it's in our best interest in the 9th District here to make sure that there's a strong and vibrant Puerto Rico. Now, there's pluses and minuses about all these relationships. On the statehood side, we see having 5, maybe 6 members of Congress and 2 U.S. senators would certainly allow for greater advocacy for 3.5 million people on the island. There's definitely many rights and privileges that do not extend to the island with regard to funding. One of the biggest issues right now that we're dealing with is that Puerto Rico gets far less Medicaid and Medicare funding, and that's important. A bill that someone else has put out, and I'll be co-sponsoring, and once I get back, we have to be in session to co-sponsor, just so everybody's understanding. Because over 6,000 doctors out of the 15,000 doctors in the island have left. Many of them are right here in Florida. In addition, there's the issue of whether we advocate for any new laws coming in. Then for the Commonwealth status, I think it's, if you like the way things are going right now, as far as the way the current relationship is, that's what you would support. One of the other issues is that there's going to be a difficult road on how to address language in Puerto Rico. In Hawaii, we have 2 official languages, so that would be one way we could address it. Again, we'd leave it to rough a decision of the folks living on their own. And then there's some of these identity questions like the Olympics, which I'd be just fine with allowing Puerto Rico to retain a team as well and a baseball team. But I will say that Ms. Hernandez, Christina Hernandez from Old Bridge, New Jersey, was on the gymnastics, the U.S. gymnastics team, and won gold, not representing just the island, but the entire United States. So we can compete, and we had others throughout, so we can compete throughout the United States. And then, of course, for the independence aspect of it, the plus would be if the island simply wants to have control of their destiny from solely within the people living in Puerto Rico. And of course, we would have to address how we would treat citizens like my father, who was born on the island, who was only a citizen by statute, like many people in this room, and many people who work for me. And I'll just end by, I recognize how critical it is for us to have a voice, and so I've made sure to have a staff where every one of the people who work for me, other than one, have lived in Central Florida for a long time. We're the diverse staff, where we're half Hispanic, with the majority of them being Puerto Ricans. We're folks born on the island, we're folks born in the tri-state area, we're folks born here in Florida, as well as many Southern and Northern neighbors and African Americans working for us and members of the LGBT community. So we recognize not only that we have to have a strong connection to advocate for them, but we have folks who understand all angles of this issue working for us. And it's an honor to represent you, and I'm so proud to be able to host this here in the 9th District. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be in front of you today. I'm proud to represent the Relieve Initiative and to be here with Congressman Soto. And thank you to the Orlando Sentinel for this opportunity to speak this morning. I would reiterate what Carlos was talking about on how difficult it is when you are treated differently, and that the federal programs come to you more limited and more conditional. that is definitely, I think, a disadvantage to the current situation. On top of that, the federal regulations also seem to be almost condescending. The Jones Act for me is an issue, is a problem. Over the last 4 decades, I think Puerto Rico, according to a study, has lost out on $29 billion of revenue because, services and products that are being transported by ship from Brazil or from wherever have to come to the mainland before they go to Puerto Rico. Why? These kind of issues, I think, also hinder, given that relationship. I think that's a problem that needs to be addressed. The one thing I would say, and maybe a different dimension to this, I find it astonishing that the urgency to act and to create Promesa, I think, had more to do with the fact of the number of Puerto Ricans that are now in Florida than the actual island itself. That the power to leverage the influence is now coming from the Puerto Ricans in the mainland and their vote and el pueblo tiene poder, right? And that's kind of a shame. And I think that has to do with the relationship between the island and the mainland. That shouldn't be the case, right? Where for pure political reasons, there's this new urgency now to act, to do something, where there wasn't that urgency before. Look, regardless of what the outcome was, and whatever you feel about Promesa, I guess that's a good thing now, that you have this newfound influence and that the Puerto Rican vote can be leveraged that way. But it's kind of a shame that it has to be that.
Daniel, I want to follow up because I'm interested. Carlos talked about the Medicaid cliff that's facing Puerto Rico, which clearly is a huge multi-billion-dollar problem looming. But in your opinion, how much of the current economic problems in Puerto Rico are attributable to its Commonwealth status?
So again, we go back to the kinds of regulations and the kind of federal government meddling that has occurred in the island. The fact that sometimes you impose tax incentive and then you rescind them. That you sometimes create carve-outs in federal law that impact the island differently. Look, I understand that a lot of this is well-intentioned. This isn't done to try to cripple the economy. But sometimes, so for example, in a study that we did on the minimum wage, you impose the same minimum wage standard on Puerto Rico that you impose on the rest of the mainland, when the per capita in Puerto Rico is 50% less than it is in America. So they actually have to pay more for labor at a very minimum. So you're shutting youth out in Puerto Rico. Again, the Jones Act is something that has caused an economic impact on them. So the Commonwealth issue is certainly a problem that has hindered, I think, economic growth in the island. And look, at the end of the day, what you want more than anything is certainty. Investors want to know that if they draw up a contract, that you're going to honor that contract and that they're going to get a return on investment, and that the other party is going to deliver on that. And for that, you need rule of law. And rule of law right now is shaky in Puerto Rico. And now what's going on with Promesa, where things are being bartered and negotiated, nobody knows where they stand, especially the investors. And that's a bad climate to be in, because it doesn't attract new investment, and it doesn't, I think, incentivize entrepreneurship, and it doesn't put that focus that you need on growth of productivity in the private sector that generates more jobs and more opportunity for our kids. And I think that has a lot to do with the decades of mismanagement and misspending.
I would say that the reality is that Puerto Rico is barely an afterthought with regards to being a Commonwealth. It's not even an afterthought. Our work in Washington and around the country, talking to members of Congress, other than the one sitting to my right, so many don't even realize that Puerto Ricans are American citizens. They don't know where it is. They don't realize they fought for this country, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's not even an afterthought. It's beyond that. Thank you. In that regard. So how it manifests itself in federal policy and how the island is suffering. It's already been invoked that the healthcare crisis. They were left out of the Affordable Care Act.
left out of any attempts at this failed bill that was attempted on healthcare recently. They only get 50% of the Medicare reimbursement rates that other states get. They are not eligible for many progressive tax reforms like the earned income tax credit or limitations on the child tax credit. And these are federal policies, again, looking at Puerto Rico as an afterthought, that are really contributing to the economic crisis on the island. And so while the Federation does not have a position on the status of Puerto Rico, we know the reality right now is that Puerto Rico is barely an afterthought, and that the federal government has to rethink how it looks at the island and really supports the island as well.
Carlos, I'm going to ask you, because I believe you, do you work for Governor Rosselló?
That's right, yeah.
Yes. Governor Rosselló won on a statehood platform, and as I mentioned, the island is planning a referendum on the status issue in June. Now, none of Puerto Rico's referenda has ever produced a resolution. So what would you say to skeptics who wonder whether or not it's worth doing this in June, or whether it might even be a distraction from the more pressing economic problems that are facing the island?
Well, I would respectfully disagree with the premise that none of the previous referenda has produced any clear result. I would say that the 2012 plebiscite, there was a clear rejection of the current status. There were two questions. The first question was very simple: whether you agree or not with the current status, and the majority said that they didn't agree with the current status. So I think that's what sets the stage for the process that we're going to be having in June. It's a process that follows up an appropriations that was approved by Congress on a bipartisan approach, and which basically requests the Attorney General to look at the definitions and create this or just draft this certification that all of the options that are being presented to the people in Puerto Rico comply with the U.S. Constitution and the laws of the United States. And this would be, if a certification comes down and we are approaching the deadline on that, for that, this would be the first time that we would have a federally sanctioned process. And I think that would be historic. And that brings me again back to some of the things that my fellow panelists have mentioned. When we talk about the inequalities that the status Puerto Rico represents for the Puerto Ricans living in the island, the 3.5 million U.S. citizens living in the island, I would say that we can go through program by program. We can take a look at the different ways in which Puerto Rico doesn't get Jones Act, whatever. But at the end of the day, I think this is also a civil rights issue. We go to war. We've been in war since World War I up until now. Actually, Congressman Soto just came back yesterday, and he was telling me that he met there with military members from Puerto Rico, and he was telling me just before we started here, it's the real deal. That there are a lot of Puerto Ricans there serving, and like he said, who knows this? I know it, and I think everyone should know it, and just to think that those men that are there defending our liberties, our freedom, they cannot vote for the person that sends them to war. What's that? So how do you explain that? Okay? And to me, I'm passionate about this. I am passionate because I think that the territory needs to end. And whether it's independence, whether it's statehood, I support statehood. My governor ran on a platform supporting statehood. But you know what? We need to decolonize Puerto Rico. That's what we need to happen. That's what needs to happen. It cannot continue the way it is. That's what I'll say. And I'm open here. I'm for statehood. I think that's the path that we should take. But at the end of the day, it's an issue that needs to be resolved, and we gotta get out of this tightrope that we are, this colony thing, this territorial thing. That's what we need to do.
If I may address the question, I am glad we're having a plebiscite in June, and I do believe that it is a factor in the economic recession that has plagued Puerto Rico, in that sheerly by the fact that more federal funds would flow to the island and the fact that they'd have stronger representation would be factors in economic improvement. Or in the alternative, for those who support independence, then they'd have total control of their own destiny and would be able to make decisions on their own without a government where they have no representation other than one non-voting member far away are making economic decisions. But there are also other reforms that are plaguing Puerto Rico that I've had the pleasure of talking with, including Senator Rios. Civil service reform is a huge issue in Puerto Rico that we've talked about because the patronage system is much like we faced many years ago, where you have people who are being appointed based upon relationships far more than by their ability to make decisions. And we're dealing with a lot of that debt now. Another big issue is overregulation. We see it's very hard to do business in Puerto Rico, and I know that Senator Rios and others are pushing to make sure that it is more easy to hire people, it is more easy to start a business, and more transparency so that you know when you're going into Puerto Rico you could get business permits and things quicker. So there's a lot to do, and then there's certainly some belt tightening that they're doing right now in the budget, and those are difficult decisions within Florida where we had to cut government.
Affinity. I have a shared culture with Puerto Rico, and of course I visited the island a lot. But the point to that is that just because the plebiscite passes or doesn't pass or whatever the outcome is, and I would honor whatever the will of the people is, of course, that the rest of the country has to ratify it. Senators and congressmen, states, and given the current economic crisis, that needs to be addressed.
It's being addressed then. It's being addressed. We are working hard on it right now.
Well, no, I guess what I'm saying is we have to shift from the actual situation that we're in to some kind of solvency and sustainability for the rest of the country to say.
Yeah, do you mean it needs to be addressed or it needs to be resolved?
Again, certainty. We need certainty, at least on the path towards solvency and resolving. At least that is what we need. And tough decisions have to be made. Of course, I'm stating the obvious, but remember that the second part of the equation is the rest of the country.
Okay, we're going to take a break from my questions for Rafael to pose some of the questions that you've submitted.
Thank you, Paul. Of course, we have a lot of questions about the statehood, and some of them I think nobody has the answer. But somebody asked, what is the percentage of Puerto Rican voters in favor of independence, statehood, and Commonwealth, and what percentage of people under 40 years support statehood? If I may say something, probably we will know in June what the percentage are. But I want to take the opportunity to combine a couple of questions, and I want Jose and Danielle, they are expert on public policy, maybe they can help us out. I would like to know what they think. Somebody asked, why is it so difficult for professionals coming from Puerto Rico to establish here in Central Florida? And they mentioned doctors and nurses and teachers. Actually, another member of the audience asked, it is a problem that so many Puerto Rican professionals are leaving the island. And that takes me to the question, which is, somebody asked, what if any preparations should Central Florida be making in case it needs to absorb a mass exodus from the island? Do you think that local government, the state of Florida, should do something, pass legislation to address the fact that every day, every week, people from Puerto Rico are moving to our state?
No, they shouldn't. Americans get to decide where they want to travel. Punto. I mean, I don't want the federal government or some senator or some congressman telling me that I can move to this state or not to that state or whatever. Bottom line. And Puerto Ricans are Americans. Newsflash. Look, the thing about the adaptability and assimilation is a different topic. We have to deal with this with the 11 million folks who are here currently undocumented in America too. At the Libre Initiative, we understand that public policy, above all, has to allow people to flourish. The government exists to defend our rights and our liberties. Not to remove them or lessen them, or, you know, it exists to defend them, to preserve them. Now, the reason why liberty and freedom is so important is because that's the key to progress. When one is free to commerce and to trade and to do these things. Now, let me get back to accommodating the folks that whether they're Puerto Rican or whether they're coming from Mexico or Centro America or cualquier lugar del Caribe. Look, right now, currently in America, 30% of Latinos speak only Spanish. That's a barrier to opportunity in America. 33% of Latino adults do not have a high school diploma. That's a barrier. In some states, half of us do not have a driver's license. That's a barrier. Now, at the Libre Initiative, we love to tout, you know, free market principles, and we love to tout about, you know, the limited government. But when you don't have access to the free market, that's an issue, and we have to recognize that. So how do we best position people to give them better access and better opportunity in a free market system, which is our system here in America? So we put our money where our mouth is. You know, our field agents, Juan is here and Annie is here. Across the country, we provide English classes to thousands of Latinos. Naleo did a study. If an immigrant learns English, they will quadruple their salary in the long run. That's transformational. That's a big deal. If you have a driver's license, you can now drive to work with certainty that you won't get stopped and you won't get ticketed. And that's a big deal to get a driver's license. We found out that over 70% of Latinos were failing their driver's license test in Las Vegas. We've since provided a driver's license training to over 4,000 to 5,000 Latinos, and over 80% of them are now passing that driver's license exam because of this training. That changes lives. We take it for granted, for a lot of us, right? A driver's license, English, a high school diploma. I'm a high school dropout. My parents were farm workers who would work the fields in California and Nebraska and the state of Washington. After the 10th grade, I was in a position where I couldn't continue school because I was missing so much of it. And the counselors wouldn't let me continue because, you know, I'd be taken to Mexico for 2 to 3 months out of the year and then, you know, I'd be out in the fields every other day. I got a GED, and that was my second chance. That put me back on track. And I was able to go to college and get a job as a police officer and then, you know, get into this business. But I thank God every day that I had a second chance. And a lot of Latino adults need that second chance. And Puerto Ricans coming from the island are looking for opportunities. So yes, we can work together as a community and provide those kind of skills and those kind of assets and those kind of resources to position them better in the marketplace where there could be so much opportunity, and we can do the same in the island.
So a few points to your question. First of which is, while it is the island's loss, the mass migration to Central Florida and other parts of the country is a net economic gain to Florida and to states across the country. Puerto Ricans who are coming here are working, are paying taxes, are contributing to the economy in a great way and helping Florida be overall a much more economically powerful state. And that's a reality. There is an issue, of course, where whether it's here in Florida or around the country where Boricuas who come and want to teach or practice medicine or nursing or whatever, there may be sort of professional certification barriers where states aren't being flexible enough to incorporate these folks who frankly are needed to serve a growing Latino population across the country, where we need more adult ESL classes. We need more K through 12, ESL, bilingual education, and dual language programs. We need more health practitioners who are bilingually and culturally competent. And so by passing state and local policies that can allow these folks to sort of recertify or adjust their status professionally to be able to teach, to be able to provide medicine, that's really powerful and can help the community grow and overall help the Latino community and the states be more economically viable and serve communities. And with regards to the issue of state and local governments supporting the integration of Puerto Ricans who are coming here to Florida, I would argue, in contrary to my colleague Danielle, that absolutely Florida has an obligation that while Puerto Ricans are coming here and they're paying taxes and working and creating jobs and starting businesses, that the state and local governments should be offering adult English classes that are government funded to help as many who need free English classes to learn as possible. They need to provide more schooling space. They need to provide housing and other resources to make sure families are strong and those that are falling through the cracks are able to really be a viable part of Central Florida and of the nation as a whole. And so the state and local governments do have an obligation, and we're going to be saying that in Tallahassee this year and every year until they really address that.
If I may, having served both in the state legislature and now in the federal government, there's a few issues that are going on here. First, there's a right to interstate travel, including in Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and other areas. So that's protected under the Constitution. While certainly there have been constitutional laws passed, I do not anticipate any unconstitutional laws restricting travel. The real issue is infrastructure and opportunity. And I could tell you that we in Central Florida welcome all our brothers and sisters from the island, but we also recognize that it's at the detriment of the island as people are moving away. So we understand that complicated welcoming as well as making sure to improve the economy in Puerto Rico so people who want to come here come just because they want to, not because of economic opportunities alone. And the story of Central Florida and in Florida in part is because of that migration. 50% of the growth in Florida since the last, going up to the last census were Hispanics, majority Puerto Rican. So we were 50% of the growth in the state that brought us 2 new congressional seats. And the story of Puerto Ricans relocating here also is in the fact that we've had to build a ton of new infrastructure. Everything from increasing I-4 capacity that we're working on to building the Point Santa Valencia campus to having a sunrail that goes all the way down to Point Siena. All these are infrastructure needs. With Osceola, we've got them several $1 million more for their school board because we have to build high schools just to keep up with everybody. And while we're proud to do that, we had to have a conscious effort to build the infrastructure for all these folks coming in. In addition, there's a language issue. So I worked with both John Cortez and Victor Torres to increase the amount of time our ESOL kids get before their test count. They used to only get 1 year, and then their tests would count against them, and they get left back. Now they get 2 years. We wanted 3, but it was a compromise with Governor Scott to get to at least 2 years so that our kids get enough time to learn the language, as was discussed before. And so it's not only freedom of travel, but it's the infrastructure to be here. And then for licenses, I think the key to understand with Florida is that every state and every territory has the same trouble. It's not a unique issue to Puerto Rico. If you're in Maine, you can't switch your license to be an attorney here without taking the bar. If you're in California, there's no reciprocity. There's no reciprocity for just about all the professions. And so we've driven it by need. First thing of major improvement, teachers. It used to take forever for teachers from Puerto Rico to come here and then have to take the state license exam, and they'd be paraprofessionals and others for so long. Now we're recruiting in Orange County and Osceola County down on the island and have temporary license status. So many folks are coming here in day one. They're able to teach our kids, and we know we have the need of that. For doctors, if they serve in areas of critical need, they can also get temporary medical licenses, and I think that should apply to nurses. But there are a whole host of other degrees, professions like law, like architects, and others that every state and Puerto Rico are put on the same level, and it comes back to the origin of our state, which is that we've had a lot of fraud and a lot of abuse of our seniors here, whether it be contractors, whether it be lawyers, whether it be others. So we want them to be certified under our standards here in Florida to protect this large population coming in. We don't want people to dabble in the law or in contracting or dabble in being an architect here. We want them to be according to Florida standards. And so if the need is there, the state has been flexible. If it's something where we already have plenty, people need to take our exams. And so we maintain the quality control because we're talking about our citizens here that we're protecting also with licenses. So I think need has driven it and will continue to drive it.
So if we're talking about changes at the local level, those things that he's talking about can be done in Puerto Rico, where we make the processes faster, where we lessen the bureaucracy of how to get things done. Right now, there was a study done. If you compared it to a country, Puerto Rico is the 144th most difficult place to get a construction permit. 122nd most difficult in registering property, and the 97th worst in enforcing contracts. Eso traba. That causes restrictions on commerce and trade and entrepreneurship. And the kind of things that he's talking about, where we can make these processes quicker here, let's do that in Puerto Rico, is the point.
And if I may, talking about that, and I don't know, and I probably should have started with this, with what I'm going to say now, but when the new administration began, January 2nd of 2017, the governor broke the tradition. Normally, in Puerto Rico, a governor has this big party in front of the Capitol Hill. I don't know if you've ever been to El Capitolio there in San Juan, but it's beautiful because you have the ocean in front of it. It's a beautiful scene. But normally it's this big party and celebration because of the new administration, whatever. The governor this year decided the first change was that he was going to swear in at 12:01 a.m. So the public swearing ceremony was just part of the tradition, but not necessarily was the swearing. He swore in a few hours before. 12:10, he had signed 8 executive orders. By the third week, he had signed into law 12 bills. By now, he signed into law 26 bills, about 20-something executive orders. 80% of them tackling the same issues that Mr. Garza's mentioning here and that mentioned here. Trying to, first of all, first executive order was to cut down government spending from all of the agencies in 20% from the current budget. Cutting down or slashing political appointments by 15 to 20% in all agencies. He created labor reform, and he passed into bill. He's working on a tax reform. He created a new incentive for medical professionals to stay in the island. He created a new permit law, and they're working right now on creating a uniform incentive code, which in Puerto Rico you have a lot of incentives, but some of them people don't even know or are just not even applicable right now to the situation. And basically we're reforming on that side. There's a health reform law that it's being worked right now, that's worked through the fiscal plan that was approved by the board. We've been tackling what we inherited, trying to create or restore Puerto Rico's credibility to the world, in Washington, in New York, but to everyone. Which I think that at the end of the day, what happened throughout the past couple of years was that our credibility was tarnished. For instance, during the Promesa process, I don't know if you followed that process, but the previous government, they didn't provide audited financial statements from the previous 3 years. Not to the House, not to the Senate. I remember a letter from Senator Orrin Hatch, the finance chairman of the Senate, asking, hey, at least from 2012 to 2013, and those didn't come out until the end of the year, 2012, 2013. So initially, that's what we were working with. That's what we were working with, to restore the credibility, be transparent in this whole process. Sit down with everyone and try to find a path for growth while tackling the situation in the island. It's what I tell everyone. This is not a process of today we're here and tomorrow we're gonna be kumbaya, we're done. Puerto Rico's it's a process. It takes time. 70 billion. It's not a debt that you resolve in one day. However, for instance, there was this RSA that was being dealt with by the previous administration, and it was agreed on, and he was on the governor's table for 7 or 8 months before he left office. He didn't sign it, and creditors were saying, governor needs to sign that immediately. We had a hearing only on that topic. We were working with it. People were, interested parties were like pushing because we were, supposedly we were in the process, but we were working with all of the other things that I just mentioned. 2 weeks after that, an agreement was signed. And again, I just highlight that process to say that what PROMESA establishes for Puerto Rico, and that whole process of Title VI, the negotiation process, sitting down with everyone, that's taking place right now. And and we hope that we get to amicable solutions for everyone. But we also gotta understand that there are gonna be haircuts to the debt. There are gonna be situations that probably not everyone's gonna like. But the situation calls for those kind of actions. And I just want to say also, in terms of something that was mentioned before, was that we got to resolve the debt before being a state. Well, you have states that have bigger debt to ratio than Puerto Rico, and and they're there. So I think that we need to work we need to tackle the crisis. We need to continue walking a path towards recovery, towards growth. We need to do that. It needs to be done, and I believe that we're doing it. Again, not everyone, people might have different opinions, but we're doing it. And in the process, and this is maybe a segue to the previous topic, in the process, we want to resolve our 199-year-old territorial situation.
I do want to ask one last question about the plebiscite before we talk more about the economic crisis. And I'll direct the question first to Congressman Soto. But you mentioned that you served in the legislature before you were elected to Congress. And you have had perhaps the misfortune in both bodies of being part of the legislative minority. So the question is might the plebiscite turn into, if the clear result is in favor of statehood, might that just turn into an exercise in futility and frustration given the current leadership in Congress? The leaders that you've come to know in Congress during your time up there, do you think that they would be inclined to accept Puerto Rico as the 51st state and add 2 U.S. senators and 5 or 6 members of Congress?
There is no doubt the road would be difficult, but it's one that should the people of Puerto Rico decide to embark on, I will support them on. There is some idea from the Republicans that it would produce 4 or 5 Democrats in the House and 2 Democrats in the Senate, and the first thing I would tell them is we have a governor who identifies as a Democrat and a resident commissioner who identifies as a Republican representing the island. So it's not that clear cut that it would be in favor of one party or another. But the beauty of if there is a vote for statehood is it goes back to the ultimate question, which is, or if the people decide independence, that's another road obviously, is that it's a civil rights issue. Should the people of Puerto Rico who are Americans decide to be a state, it now becomes a matter of a civil right. These are Americans who have decided to become a state, and like the other territories before them that became the rest of the United States, we honored and recognized it. And so my biggest fight will be from the highest moral ground possible, which is equality for Americans who've decided on their own their destiny. And it only takes a vote of Congress. It's not a constitutional amendment or anything like that. And I sit on the committee, the first committee of reference that would vote on this. And certainly, should the people decide for statehood, we would push for a vote as soon as possible in that committee and continue to push for votes on that. But yes, it'll be a difficult road ahead, but so has any other civil rights struggle in our nation's history. And it's one based upon the will of the people of Puerto Rico that I will respect and advocate for, depending on what their decision is.
Rafael.
Yes, it's 1 p.m., so we have half an hour, so I'm going to make some questions, and then I have plenty of questions there too, so I'm going to try to do my best. One very, very quick for Daniel, if he wants to address it, or Congressman Soto. Somebody asked about the cabotage law. It says if this law would be eliminated, would create thousands of jobs in Puerto Rico. Very, very quick, please. What's going to happen with the cabotage law?
I would speak to you.
Well, I would start with the fact that I'm open-minded to looking at changes. Keep in mind, Florida and Puerto Rico both have big interests in this because we're talking about the Port of Jacksonville, but we're also talking about goods being higher in Puerto Rico as a result of it. First, we'd have to establish that we could have the same type of security on the island that we do in Jacksonville, because there's a high responsibility, because that's one of the front lines of terrorism. And then second, we'd need to make sure that we're protecting the type of worker protections that are already in the Jones Act on the island. That is a big part of why those jobs are so high paying. And so we'd want to make sure that those protections for employees who work under the Jones Act continue to flourish in Puerto Rico. Certainly I'm open-minded to it. I just want to make sure if we open up the Jones Act, we wouldn't be eroding all the positive things in the Jones Act as we look towards it, and make sure that Puerto Rico has the funding they need to have the security they need so that we are not endangering the homeland.
Daniel, want to add something about that?
Just whatever advances freedom to commerce and trade. Look, the ports of Puerto Rico are an absolute asset, and they should leverage them to the nth degree. And so
Awesome. Thank you. Keep talking about the economy. Somebody from the Puerto Rico Chamber of Commerce of Florida asked how many business have you guys helped to bring product from Puerto Rico. By the way, we in the Sentinel, we're very proud that we always cover businesses coming from the island to Central Florida, small businesses or big businesses, and Maison sandwiches, the sandwiches that we enjoy early today. Also, I want to ask Carlos, very quick too, if he has something to say about the current crisis with the University of Puerto Rico. And finally, I want everybody to say me something very, very brief, but there is a question that I think everybody shares in one way, and it is, what can we do to support Puerto Rico from the mainland, from here in Florida? What we all can do to support Puerto Rico?
Okay, so I'll start with the second question and then I'll answer the first one.
Awesome.
You gotta call your congressman and you gotta call your senators and you gotta call your governor.
Darren?
No, I don't know. He's here. No. You don't have to call him because he's here. But where are the others? Okay, and where's their voice? And where's their worry about what might happen with Puerto Rico? Again, I'm going back to health because that's what I'm working on a daily basis. I'm having meetings on a daily basis with Senate leaders, with House leaders, and on that issue, particularly for Florida, that if we go into the cliff, the Medicaid cliff that we're talking about, that could represent in a projection about a $6 billion expenditure between the federal government and the state government if we have to cut down beneficiaries from 450,000 people to 600,000 people, like HHS has been saying. So what can you do? Your voice counts. Your vote counts. So you got to call them. And then in terms of the UPR situation, which it's very sad that what's going on right now, the governor has met with leaders from the student council. He's met with the university's administration. They presented a plan. He's respected the autonomy of the university to present a path forward for a solution in terms of what's going to happen internally within the university in terms of the monies and whatever. It's a situation that needs to be tackled. We've been again in meetings with both parties, and we're waiting for them present a good resolution of that situation.
Thank you, Carlos. Jose, what can we do?
I think the calls are really smart. They worked for this really terrible healthcare law that was put forth in Congress recently. They've worked on getting Steve Bannon removed from the National Security Council. The calls are working, and so I think everyone calling today, you can call him, it's fine. It's a democracy. He's built for it, and he wants you to call his office. But he wants you to call other offices too. And then he wants you to get a friend or a family member to call tomorrow. And then you each get 2 more people to call. And before you know it, millions of people are calling Congress every day to say you have to act on Puerto Rico. Now, what are you going to ask for, right? What are you going to ask for, number one, right, to resolve this healthcare crisis, which is coming very, very soon. They need to find a way to drive revenue to the island for the long term, or to include them in the existing Affordable Care Act law, right? And that takes congressional action, and they need to hear from us about that. Also, why isn't Puerto Rico the nation's leading economy around clean energy, wind energy, solar energy? And why isn't Congress authorizing laws to invest in the island infrastructure-wise? Now, I respect folks who are saying we want to have regulatory changes, we want to tweak our payrolls and all that stuff. We would argue that the austerity is there. There are no more rabbits to pull out of a hat. Layoffs have been done. Schools have been shuttered. The people of Puerto Rico cannot endure anymore in terms of cuts, layoffs, closures, et cetera. And so it's beautiful to see students in the streets protesting. That's democracy as well. They march, we call, and together, hopefully we can get action on healthcare, the environment, and overall economic stimulus from the federal government.
Thank you, Jose. Daniel, what can we do to help Puerto Rico from the mainland?
Well, I would move away exactly from what he's talking about, which is a call for more government intervention, more government rules, more government regulation. We're from D.C., we're here to help. Government does not generate wealth. What we need is a plan that's going to create sustainability. We need to advocate for economic freedom for the island. That's what we need to do. And what that means is we need the rule of law. We need private property. We need free enterprise. That should be the focus. Now, I do respect and admire very much what Governor Rosselló has already put into motion. I like a lot of the reforms that he's done and the deregulation. Look, countries like Ireland and New Zealand were in exactly the same position that Puerto Rico was in. These economies were going to the tank. The unemployment was at 15 and 17% unemployment. Their GDP was 0.5, 0.4 respectively. You had stagnant wage growth. And what they did was tax rates were slashed in half, the excise tax, the sales tax, the income tax, eliminated all tariffs, deregulated labor markets, removed subsidies from ag and industry, reformed government departments, and privatized a lot of government activities. The results, they're now at 3% unemployment, both of these economies. There is growth that has gone to 5 and 10% in Ireland. They call it the Irish miracle. These folks put these reforms into place that put a focus on creating opportunity, on increasing productivity in the private sector. That's where wealth is made. You don't take from Peter to give to Paul, and somehow you think that's going to be sustainable. Paul is creating his own wealth. That's what should be the focus in Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Daniel. And last, Congressman Soto, by the way, I'm not Sandra Pelosi, but be brief, please.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the island and here at home, but I want to start with here at home. We've already created a good business environment here for those who come from Puerto Rico to start jobs. Everything from our local Malau bakery getting a new place to Titan coming here and bringing so many of the distribution products in agriculture and in music and in any other of the cultural things that make us think about our heritage. So I strongly put in a plug for the Puerto Rican Chamber, for PRAFA, for the Hispanic Chamber, for doing a lot of that liaison work, and they've done wonderful things, and Prospera, formerly known as HBIF, all great ambassadors to here. We also help folks here by making sure that we have enough infrastructure, and so one of the things we're working on is expanding I-4, getting Sentinel in place, having a new college down in Point Siena, getting people to and from the airport by expanding that out and investing in our tourism, agriculture, and high-tech industries here. On the island, I'm helping primarily by being on the committee that oversees PROMESA, and we need a few things. We need to reduce the debt. We need to increase the ability for Puerto Ricans to be able to apply for tax deductions like the Earned Income Tax Credit, which encourages people to work, and the Child Tax Credit, which encourages people to have families and have stable environments. In addition, I would like to see more access to SBA loans and agricultural loans, and I happen to sit on the Ag Committee and will work on that specific issue as well. Overall, I think we also need some local reforms on the island that I've talked to Senator Rios about, and they are doing their best. Civil service reform so that the patronage system of Puerto Rico finally ends, and I know Governor Osceola is working on that. Having far less regulations than what we see already, and making sure that we have justice in the courts, and a lower tax base without frittering away so much of the taxes that we end up in some places that are worse off, like in Kansas, where they cut everything, and now they're dealing with huge deficits. In the end, I think it's about balance. It's about wise decisions, and it's about the people here in Central Florida of a common heritage, helping out our brothers and sisters on the island for the benefit and economic prosperity of both regions. And I want to thank you all for sending me to Washington. I'm here and back 50% of the time, so you let me know what I could be doing. And yes, I do like the phone calls. I do like people reaching out to us. Thank you. It's an honor to represent you.
Danielle, I wanted to follow up on, because you mentioned Ireland and New Zealand. And of course, there's another country that critics of the current process will bring up with Puerto Rico, and that's Greece. The fear that austerity could lead to kind of a economic stagnation like Greece has experienced in its struggles to repay its debt in the European Union. And how does Puerto Rico avoid that?
So austerity in Greece meant higher taxes. And a cut actually was a cut to the growth as opposed to a real cut. So you had other issues that were actually bringing it down, that were weighing the Greece economy down. Now you had a massive bureaucracy. You had overspending. You had liberals who were running amok, basically spending what they didn't have, which is kind of the similar situation that's gone on for decades in Puerto Rico. So austerity is now, of course, a pejorative. When I'm talking about economic reform, I'm talking about putting a focus on the private sector. I'm talking about let's get growth going, economic growth, as opposed to hurting the people of Puerto Rico. I do believe in infrastructure, and infrastructure is important, and we should make assets out of our natural resources. And look, Puerto Rico is rich in natural resources, in its ports, and we're not making use of that the way we should. And sometimes I think our federal law is actually hindering growth by hindering these assets.
Are you taking questions on the floor?
No, what we're asking you to do is write questions and drop them in. Okay, 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 okay. All right.
But also taking questions from the floor is more dynamic and interactive. I mean,
All right.
you can submit a question at the beginning
Sure.
which has no relevance to what has been said.
Sure. Well, you know, we've done a lot of these, and we've tried it both ways, and this works a little better for us, but I appreciate your opinion. Okay. So,
I don't think it's working.
okay, well,
Now, what you have is a very homogeneous panel.
Okay.
A moderator that really has not challenged or interrupted or followed up. So it's really been very bland.
okay, well,
Well, I would argue that this panel is not very homogeneous. We do agree on some pieces of how to help the island. We disagree fundamentally on many of the ways to help the island. Well, I mean, I can disagree with the previous remarks around austerity, and I can tell you as someone who grew up in the South Bronx, whose parents were on public assistance, my mother's a single mother, the safety net was vital for us, and removing that safety net would have crushed our family. We needed access to domestic violence shelters to make sure that she was safe and me and my sister were safe, and so safety nets were important. And I would argue that if I was laid off from government work, or if my pension was taken away, or if I wasn't able to get a loan, that would be crippling to my family and to my community. And so further austerity and gutting government programs that are proven to work, healthcare, safety nets, et cetera, are vital to Puerto Rico's survival and growth. And while, sure, we want the private sector to also contribute to the recovery of the island, it is critically important that we don't continue to erode basic public services, government employees, pensions, union worker protections. That is the path to further collapse. And if you want to help the island grow, we have to invest in our public sector, our labor unions, and our working families. So that is very different from what you just heard.
Let's gonna do this. We're gonna do this. I have several questions. We have more there. I'm going to ask everybody a question. Some of the questions, they are not addressed to one of the panelists. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask the question, I'm gonna ask the question, and I'm gonna ask one of the panelists to address it very quick because we only have 15 minutes. Somebody from the public asked Mr. Carlos Mercader, she or he says, trying to blame earlier administration is always showing a pessimistic view of Puerto Rico. So how do you think U.S. would be interested in having us, Puerto Rico, as a state? Very quick, Carlos, please. They basically saying that you guys are blaming previous administration of what's happening in Puerto Rico, and that doesn't look good when Puerto Rico is trying.
Can they point to one time in which we've blamed previous administration? What we're saying here is that, again, the problem here, the problem of Puerto Rico. The problem. That's fine. But let me say something. The problem of the debt.
We have time constraints.
It doesn't go to one administration. It goes. This is something that's been going on for years, and you know how the government grew. For instance, right now, okay, just so you know, the government right now has 132.
Between Greece and Ireland, not either one of those cases, and they're reflected by the solutions that I put forward that I am sounding like a broken record on in the Insular Indian and Alaskan Affairs Committee. And I'll give you one example of how we directly have been helping the island through this balanced approach. We had our first committee meeting on Promesa and about PREPA, which was the utility company in Puerto Rico. And we had creditors in, we had folks from the Promesa board, and the folks who are owed money to the utility companies are trying to fight for 75 cents on the dollar when folks who are going through Promesa are getting 25 cents on the dollar. And what I had to very not so subtly tell them is that if they don't negotiate in good faith and take the kind of hits that other bondholders are making, we will bring them into Promesa. And the chairman nodded and agreed, as Carlos was there at the time. So it is by also oversight through Congress to make sure that this debt is being negotiated in a good faith way and everybody's being treated similarly, that we are also helping out. Because this debt is too crushing for the island to pay back in full. And so we need to be very careful to make sure some of it's paid back, but that we do not suffocate the future with over austerity in the island.
Danielle wants.
I'd like to see more transparency on how those negotiations are going, because if some are getting 70 cents on the dollar and some are getting 25 cents on the dollar, I mean, that kind of smacks of favoritism. I'm not saying that's the case, but I mean, that's odd, isn't it? You know, and of course, some people who are higher on the priority list are now been put down on the priority list. That kind of smacks of cronyism and lobbying. Again, I'm not saying that's the case, but that's why you need more transparency, and I would say that to Carlos. I want to believe that things are happening in good faith, but when a government picks the winners and losers, that's a bad game.
Daniel, actually, I have a question for you. I think you're perfect for this one. Why does the government of Puerto Rico own the utilities company like the electric company?
Bravo.
I told you would like it.
Yeah, so again, maybe, look, I don't know the history of it, to be honest with you. I can't speak intelligently on it, but it shouldn't. Government should not be in the business of holding those kind of resources. That is best left to competition. That is best left to the private sector. Where I believe in citizens offering products and services that make our lives better. And we are the ultimate voters, because we get to reward the purveyors of services and products if they give us good customer service, if they give us a better product, and if they actually are lower in price than their competition. So when government begins to control these important facilities or these resources, you get one price and you get one service, and it usually comes with a smile. So I have issues with that, and I don't think they should own those kind of services.
And I think the key will be, we have a hybrid system that works very well here. The lights, the air conditioning are provided by Kissimmee Utility Authority here. I'm sure everybody enjoys it, run in part by an appointed government board to the Kissimmee Utilities Commission. We also have OUC, but we also have cooperatives in South Osceola run for our agricultural areas that are privately owned, and people got together to make sure our ag industry had the services. And then we also have Duke Energy, who runs a lot of the county as well. So I think where it makes sense, whoever can provide the lowest rate, sometimes it's KUA, sometimes it's Duke, sometimes it's Peace River Co-op down in South Osceola. I think there has to be an analysis of where the private sector will do a better job. And it's a lot, but not always. KUA has some of the lowest rates we have in the state, and it's run by appointees, but they have to know what they're doing, and if not, they need to be taken out.
I'm going to say this quickly in Spanish, which actually is not a question, and it says, el pueblo de Puerto Rico necesita que la deuda se audite, which means that, the people want the debt to be audited. So thank you so much for your comment. By the way, I'm not going to ask this question, I'm just going to read it. Why there is not a woman as panelist or moderator? I'm gonna share with all of you guys. Some are good readers. I know them for a while. Just two quick things. Last panel, we had Bertica Cabrera and Mercedes McCall on the talking about Cuba. And for this panel, actually, I thought about asking my new reporter, Jennifer Marcial, to be here and help me out. We decided sending her to Puerto Rico and a special assignment, and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying it right now, but she's going to be writing for both Orlando Sentinel and Sentinel about the families in Puerto Rico after the Pulse tragedy. So she was traveling, so I decided to be part of the as a moderator. But as I said, we're very inclusive. Okay, I'm going to reveal my ignorance with this kind of last question. I think I know what it means, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Somebody asked if Puerto Rico will have something similar to the Section 936, which I think has to be with incentive to the pharmaceutical companies overall. And I think it's a great question to kind of wrap up also, because a lot of questions have to do about the economy of the island. So If you can help me out, Carlos, with that, and we're going to start to wrapping up. So if you want to add something.
So in terms of a law similar to, or an act similar to what 936 meant for Puerto Rico, we're not on that path right now. Actually, we think that highlights the different treatment that Puerto Rico, that we're saying we don't want a different treatment here. And right now, during the tax reform process that's being discussed right now in Congress right now, that's our position. We want, I don't know if you know this, but in terms of tax and trade, Puerto Rico, it's treated it's weird. We're foreign from one and we're domestic for the other. And basically what we're trying to do is that treat us the same way that we treat the other states. And so we don't want a 245 or a 936, and we want the same treatment.
Perfect.
I would just add that, reiterate the ideas about helping families directly with their earned income tax credit and child tax credit. There's going to be tax reform nationally, and hopefully Puerto Rico does get included in this package. The package nationally may be terrible in our opinion, but obviously we're going to be fighting for good provisions for families in Orlando and in New York and in Hartford and everywhere else, but also in Puerto Rico as well, around these families. And just back to the point around the debt piece, we would agree that the debt should be audited. And I know the board recently talked about potentially putting forth a proposal that would cut down the debt significantly by as much as 60 or 70%, which would be, frankly, a huge deal in helping the island get through this immediate crisis. And so we'll see what happens there.
As I said at the beginning, Puerto Rico is always, people are very passionate when we talk about Puerto Rico, but time is running out. So before saying goodbye, and thanks to everybody again, I want to know if each of our panelists wants to say something to wrap it up and thanks our audience.
I would just say, look, I mean, at the end of the day, we're fighting for the same thing, and I know I had some disagreements with Mr. Jose Davila, but at the end of the day, Jose and I and everybody on this panel want sustainability, want growth, economic growth in Puerto Rico. And how we get there, look, it's important that we have this dialogue. It's important that we also talk as Americans, and get to these solutions. And then, of course, let the folks, make the decision on what's best for the island. But what we clearly need to do is to create a climate for growth, for economic growth. And sometimes that takes reining in the control of, too many voices, too many politicians with too many different ideas, and just let, I think, the growth in the private sector take its course and unleash the power of the private sector.
Thank you, Daniel. Congressman?
I'm going to end with specifics because we don't hear it enough in our government. We know that we have a huge connection with the island, both in heritage and in commerce. And we will benefit here from prosperity in Puerto Rico. And so there are a few things that I'll be fighting for and that I'd like to see. I am excited that there's a plebiscite. I do want to see a resolution to this. And we'll advocate for that resolution and specifically put myself on committees to be able to vote on it on the committee level and to also oversee in PROMESA. And in PROMESA, we want to negotiate down the debt as best we can while protecting the people. We also want to make sure that there's relief packages that use traditional things we do in all states rather than a 936 gimmick type solution by making sure that we have the earned income tax credit to encourage people to work, not be on welfare, to have the child tax credit, so we encourage and support parents and families, to make sure that we have SBA loans and ag loans so that we're encouraging small businesses to start and move forward, and also to treat Puerto Rico like states by allowing them to have Medicaid and Medicare parity. And in the end, we'd also like to see the reforms that we're starting to see happen on the island, which is civil service reform, regulatory reform, contract reform, making sure that we have the basics so that businesses can start and grow. Because in the end, the solution to the recession in Puerto Rico is with the Puerto Rican people, and we need to empower them for success.
Before Carlos. Carlos, before that, I want to also say to everybody that all the questions or comments are going to be shared with the panelists, and that's something that we're going to start doing tomorrow.
Perfect. No, I just would say that you guys here in the audience understand not the responsibility. This is something that you decide whether you want to do it or not. But that you understand the power that you have to help Puerto Rico, not necessarily by doing anything else than what we just mentioned before. Just be active on the issue. Just call your congressman. Just call your senator. Just call your governor. In Puerto Rico, our administration, and obviously, again, there are people that think differently than I think, the things that we're doing. They may think that we're not doing the right thing. I'm saying that we are tackling the issues. We're trying to be as transparent as possible in all of the negotiations that we're doing. And we're trying to set the tone for the recovery and for growth. And we need your voices to communicate this to your people, to your representatives, because they gotta understand that the situation is tough, but it's even tougher if they don't do anything. It's even tougher if they don't take action on what they know they have to. But it's easy for them just to not look at us. But if they have your voices and your letters, your emails, your activism, that will help Puerto Rico it will help a lot in the issues that we're working with. So thank you.
Jose?
I would just, build on that point that the diaspora has an opportunity and an obligation to be vocal, to be concrete about what you want, and to really communicate that with all who have authority, whether it's Congressman Soto or all in Washington or on the island, who really can help bring this situation to resolution over time. And so we all need to kind of pick up a shovel and get to work to be helpful. And we have to move fast. There are deadlines rapidly approaching, like a May 1st deadline with regards to stay on litigation with the creditors, and a whole host of other deadlines that are coming that we don't want to go to a place of all-out bankruptcy and all-out chaos and more out migration. We want to get to a place where the island is stabilized. And so we have a role to play, and let's go ahead and do that starting today. Thank you.
Before saying goodbye, I want to say that I stress out that everybody in the panel came from outside Orlando today. They flew to our city. Even Congressman Soto flew from Kuwait just to come here today. So I want to say thanks to everybody. We also want to thank, gracias a todos en la audiencia. Thanks to everybody in the audience for being here. We appreciate your attention, your questions, your comments. Everything is going to be shared with the panelists. Thanks to everybody watching online. And once again, I want to say thank you, gracias to Valencia College for having us here, and to Telemundo Orlando and all the media, Latino media, or friends, my friends, mis amigos, for being here. Paul?
Okay, we do hope you enjoyed, appreciated today's event. You can look forward to learning more as the Sentinel and El Sentinel continue our coverage of Puerto Rico there and here. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Gracias por su ayuda.